Everybody, thanks for joining us. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join us, but just sit tight. If you'd like, you can drop where you're joining us from in the chat there, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes here. Hi, Julie.
Rich. Hi, Joel.
Hello.
I haven't seen you forever. How you doing?
I know. Oh my gosh, so busy. Just like you guys. Just like field work is exploding. And but hey, I'm so excited. I saw workers of bumblebees all over Seattle today. So I'm like, okay, it's starting to ramp up. So I'm excited about doing some bumblebee surveys this summer.
Good.
Yeah. How about you guys? Are you getting in the field?
This is my field.
This is my field. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, Taylor.
Everybody.
I've been traveling a little bit. I was in southeastern United States actually. We just launched our Atlas project there, so I was there, got out in the field a little bit, which was really nice. And I'm actually headed to South Dakota to go to the Black Hills with my colleague in the Great Plains there in a couple weeks. So that'll be another field excursion.
Fun.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
All right. It seems like most folks are here. I imagine that some folks will continue to trickle in, and we'll let them do that at their leisure. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is the 2023 version of the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas training workshop. The dream team is here to assist you through the next couple hours of instruction and information. The purpose of this is really just to sort of share an update as to where we are in the project. And then also to let you know what our priorities are for this final year of the Atlas project, and give you some guidance as to how you could help best, whether you're joining us for the first time or whether you have been here since the very, very beginning. Before we officially get started, I'm just going to let our panelists introduce themselves. We'll go sort of right to left across my screen. So that makes you first, Taylor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Cotton. I'm the Conservation Assessment Section Manager with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm glad you're all here today.
Julie?
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Julie Combs, and I'm the pollinator species lead for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this is my second year helping out with the program, and very excited to be here. And thanks everybody for their participation.
That leaves me. I'm Joel Sauter. I'm a regional wildlife diversity biologist with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. I'm out of our Lewiston office in the Clearwater region, and I coordinate the Atlas in the Idaho area. So if you're anybody from Idaho participating tonight, and you have questions after tonight, I'm the person you should reach out to.
Great. And my name's Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I direct Xerces bumblebee conservation programs, and I'm really the face of this program in Oregon, and also help to direct our other Atlas projects, which I'll share some more about, with you about later. But yeah, if you have questions for things going on in Oregon, or you have questions about access, I'm probably the person to reach out to for that state. Just to orient you a little bit, we're probably all very familiar with Zoom at this point, but if you need access to closed captioning, you can go to the bottom of your screen, or at least that's where the toolbox is in mine. There should be a box that says more with 3 dots on it. If you click on it, you should be able to choose captions there, and it will provide some closed captioning for you if that is helpful for you. You should also be able to see a chat over at that bottom bar. If you click that, that will allow you to interact with other people, make comments. Some of my panelists here will probably be sharing information in the chat throughout the course of the evening. Would ask that you are respectful in the chat and use it for purposes that would benefit everybody in the room or most people in the room, and not just for you. And then you should also see a Q&A box at the bottom down there, and that is where we will be directing our question and answer. So if you have a question throughout the webinar, please feel free to post it directly in that Q&A. When you do that, there'll be some folks behind the screen, usually Joel, Julie, or Taylor, that will be maybe typing answers there. You should be able to see the questions and other people's questions, as well as the answers that are typed. And then, Joel, Julie, or Taylor could also select questions that we may answer live, sort of during, in between sessions, so that we can make sure that everybody hears the answers to those key questions. But yeah, if you have questions, please do not put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A. Joel.
Rich, I'm not seeing that I have access to everybody in the chat to be able to respond to everyone. It's only showing me hosts and panelists. Is that a control on your end?
If you click that blue box there, you should be able to choose everybody.
I only see host and then the two panelists. I don't see anybody else. I can see their chats, but I can't respond to them.
Oh, I just changed that setting. You should be able to now.
Got it now.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. All right. I think without further ado here, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Julie, I could still see you. Can you let me know if you can, someone let me know if you can see my screen, please?
Looks good, Rich.
Great, thank you. All right, so yeah, this project is in its 5th year. It is a collaboration between the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, the Xerces Society, and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Unfortunately, our partner at ODF&W was not able to join us today, but their contact information is on our website, and it is also on this sheet. Her name is Laura Tussler, and her email address is on the screen, and feel free to use that also if you need to reach out to somebody in the state of Oregon. In case you are not aware, the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation is a nonprofit. We're based in Portland, Oregon. Our mission is to conserve invertebrates through the protection of their habitat. We have a number of different programs in which we go about this. We have a native pollinator program, and that program is largely affiliated with working lands and agricultural lands. So folks helping farmers to put habitat on their property to increase increase beneficial insects on farms, including pollinators. We have an endangered species program. I work for the endangered species program. Our role is to advocate and do science for imperiled organisms and to help them to recover. We have an aquatic invertebrate program that works on freshwater mussels, a butterfly conservation program that largely works on Western monarchs, although we work on a number of other regional species, particularly in the West. And then we have a pesticide program that sort of serves as an umbrella for all of these other programs as it helps to reduce the use or impacts of pesticides on invertebrates at a broad scale. We go about our work in a number of different ways. We do workshops like the workshop that I'm teaching this evening. We also do a lot of other hands-on workshops for biological professionals, as well as for citizen and community scientists. And we also have a number of printed resources that are available on our website. We also do a bunch of direct science on a good day. This is what my office looks like. I'm out doing field surveys, looking for rare species or doing population census counts for imperiled animals. We also use community science like our Bumblebee Atlas projects to gather data across a broad scale and to help us reach places that we otherwise wouldn't be able to in a relatively rapid amount of time. And then we also do advocacy when necessary, when the need for protection or the need for new policies arise. We're in political spaces advocating for the protection of invertebrates and their habitat. Sometimes policy decisions and regulatory decisions are needed in order to preserve some of these species. And then we do a lot of education and outreach. Over the last 15 years or so, we've reached over 100,000 professionals. We've done trainings in all 50 US states, in Canada, Mexico, in Europe, and also in Asia. Sometimes they're online like this, and sometimes they're also in person, and getting more and more so now that we're coming out of the COVID pandemic. And then we also do a lot of on-the-ground conservation work. Again, over the last 15 years or so, we've supported pollinator habitat restoration on over 900,000 acres, and we've protected and restored more than 1.5 million acres for rare and at-risk invertebrates on public lands. We are a member-supported organization. If you are a Xerces Society member, I want to thank you very much for your support and for being here tonight. If you're not a member and are interested in joining, there's a URL there on the screen, and we would encourage you to join our movement and would really appreciate it. It allows us to put on presentations like this and to do the outreach and education that we're able to and reach so many people. All right, so that is sort of my preamble. And now we can get into the meat of why we're here tonight, which is to talk about the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas. We're going to focus on two main modules tonight. We're going to talk about why we're doing a Bumblebee Atlas project. And this will include a lot of updates about what we're doing and how we're doing it and what we've learned so far. And then we'll take a little bit of break and we'll talk about what you can do to help. And we'll focus really on sort of an A to Z. How do you adopt a grid cell? How do you do a survey? And we'll also talk about priorities for 2023 in there, and really learn about what our asks are for you for this year and what we're hoping to accomplish in what may be the final year of the Atlas project, at least in its current iteration. If there's time at the end, after we've gone through all of this, I may dive into a little bit about bumblebee identification and the photos that we need to take to identify bumblebees. But it's quite possible I may run out of time tonight, and we may just save that for a separate webinar like we have in years past and do the identification piece separately. In case you missed it, occasionally in these webinars in past years, we've also covered bumblebee ecology and conservation. We're not going to do that tonight, but we did do a webinar about a month ago where we covered bumblebee ecology and conservation for Atlas volunteers. It was recorded and it's now available on the Xerces Society YouTube channel. So if you're interested and would like to watch that webinar at some other time, please feel free and go and do that. We can get the URL to you if you need it. All right, so real quickly, diving into module 1, why we started doing this Bumblebee Atlas project and how it's going. Generally speaking, when people think about invertebrates, a lot of people don't really have fond feelings for them. And I know I'm probably, for the most part, preaching to the choir tonight. Most of you are here because you care about invertebrates, you understand why they're important, but a lot of people don't. I would say that the vast majority of the population, at least here in the United States, sort of thinks of these animals as the animals that bother them, that ruin their picnics, that ruin their backyard gatherings, that sting their kids, that really get in the way. And that's really unfortunate because the vast majority of insects out there are beneficial, and they're doing wonderful things for our planet and really in many ways helping the ecosystem go round. They're out there conducting decomposition. So they're returning nutrients to the soil to allow our plants to grow and to increase that productivity that comes from the sun. They're also conducting biocontrol in our natural areas, in our gardens, and in our farm fields. There's a lot of predatory insects out there who fly around and eat other insects, like the caterpillars and other things that might be eating plant materials and causing sort of an infestation. There's a lot of predatory wasps and other insects that are out there, eating and controlling those pests, which in turn reduces our need for chemical inputs for insecticides. So it's kind of when you start using insecticides, it becomes a negative feedback loop where, in addition to losing some of those bad insects, we're losing the majority of good insects as well. And then they're not there to control the system anymore, and things get out of whack very quickly. Insects and invertebrates are also the base of the food chain. They're feeding everything directly from fish and small songbirds and mammals, all the way up to grizzly bears and other large predators. And then most of what we'll be talking about tonight is pollination. They're also indirectly feeding many, many, many animals on the planet, including us, right? 1 out of 3 bites of food that we eat comes from plant that was pollinated by an insect. And insects are also helping to feed a lot of the other wildlife on the planet. Songbirds, grizzly bears, coyotes, small mammals all have, vegetables and fruits as some part of their diet, and largely it's a significant portion of the calories that they're taking in. And those animals would not have that food without pollinators. So pollinators are incredibly important for the environment and helping make sure that we have healthy ecosystems. In case you don't know what pollination is, it's essentially plant sex. It's the movement. Plants have, generally speaking, they have male parts and they have female parts. The female part is the pistil and the male part is the stamen. And what needs to happen for a plant to reproduce is the pollen grains that are usually on the anther needs to move to the stigma, which is the very top of the pistil. And at that point, the plant will be fertilized and it will start to grow seeds. And most plants need a vector or some animal or other vector to move the pollen from the anthers to the pistil. And often that animal is a bee. And the bee sort of goes to a plant. It eats pollen. It's the sole source of protein for bees. And it also collects pollen to bring back to its nest to feed to its young. So it's intentionally moving pollen through the landscape. And in turn also moves pollen from flower to flower and allows flowers to get fertilized and therefore reproduce and grow fruits. So it's a really important process for plant reproduction. More than 85% of the flowering plants require an animal, and usually that animal is an insect, particularly here in North America, for pollination. And because of this, bees are critical to crop production. 10% of the economic value of agriculture is due to pollinators, and this comes in the terms of billions of dollars on a global scale. And it's not just honeybees that are doing this. Wild bees are providing the majority of pollination to agriculture, whether managed honeybees are present or not. And we have tremendous wild bee diversity in the United States and in the world. We've got around 3,600 species of bees here in the United States. When we think about all of North America, which includes Mexico, we get around 5,200 species. And worldwide, there are more than 20,000 species of bees. They come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And there are, since we're here to talk about bumblebees, there are around 265 bumblebee species worldwide. Again, worldwide, there are 7 major bee families. They're broken down into the different groupings that you see here. One of these families is native only to Australia and isn't native here. So we have 6 families of bees here in North America. And just to give you some sense of where things are and how this breaks down, if we go back in evolutionary time, the red arrow that just popped on screen is around the time that we believe, or the evidence shows, that angiosperms emerged from the evolutionary process. And these are our flowering plants. And it's no huge surprise that at the same time, we get a divergence from insects, where we get our wasps head off on one branch. So let me get my pointer out here. So this is the point in time where wasps separate from bees. So this is the branch that would head towards the huge diversity of wasps that we have in the world. And this is the branch that headed to bees. So bees are evolved from wasps. They're essentially vegetarian wasps. They evolved a diet that consists of getting their protein from plant material and not from animal material like most wasps do. There are exceptions to that. When you have 20,000 or 50,000 species, you get a lot of variation. But for the most part, bees are vegetarians and wasps are carnivores. And as the flowering plants emerged at the same time, we started to see this huge explosion in bee diversity. And that bee diversity has led to the different families that I just told you about. Most of these species are solitary. So around 75% of the bees in the world are solitary. They just live in a hole in the ground, or in the hole in a tree, or in a hollow stemmed plant somewhere. And most of them nest directly in the ground, and some of them nest in some cavity above the ground. In addition, so to give you some sense of where the social species like honeybees and bumblebees and some of the halictids, these are the ones that are currently outlined in red here are the different subfamilies that have some sociality within them. So most species are not social, but there is some in the family Halictidae and in the family Apidae. And the family Apidae is where we get bumblebees and honeybees. And specifically, we get eusociality so there's lots of different levels of sociality within the bees. Some bees are just what we call sort of social, where they nest in aggregations, and they might help each other out a little bit, but for the most part, each female is laying their own eggs and they're just living close together for protection. When we get to eusociality, that's sort of a form of division of labor, where you then get sort of a one female bee that's in charge, and you get a bunch of other bees that are working to help that female bee out. And we only see that in some small families of the Halictidae and in the Apidae, which is the honeybees and bumblebees and stingless bees from Mesoamerica. And then honey making is really only a very, very small portion of the bees on the planet. That sort of gold circle that just popped up shows that it's just a small slice of the Apidae that are actually these honey making bees. So there's only 5 honeybee species in the world, and then there's 250 or so stingless bees that are also in that family. So this is just to sort of give you some sense of the bee diversity on the planet, as well as a sense of the different life histories and ecologies that different bees have. What we're learning here in this Bumblebee Atlas is really important, but I think it's important to just recognize that it's a really small slice of the bee world that we're focusing on. And I think some of our hope is that, by working on bumblebees, that bumblebees will more or less serve as umbrella species, and the actions that we take to protect bumblebees will hopefully help a lot of these other ones that are, because they're just solitary bees living in a hole in the ground somewhere, they're very difficult to study. And in many cases, they're even difficult to find. For a lot of these animals, we don't even know their true range map or what their host plants are. There's a lot still to be known about the bee world. Okay, so as I just sort of mentioned, like bumblebees are a very small slice of bee diversity in the world, but they're still incredibly important. And So I'm just going to explain a little bit as to why we started doing a Bumblebee Atlas project, and then we'll dive into sort of what we learned and what we hope to learn in the months ahead. One of the main reasons that we started conducting this Bumblebee Atlas project is we've heard for years, and a lot of the data that we have and have seen others produce shows that a lot of key pollinators are declining. There are, depending on which metric you look at, a lot of people suggest that as many of a quarter of our native bees are facing some degree of extinction risk. There's a lot of different threats out there that are facing them, pesticides and food loss and disease and pathogens, climate change, all of these effects, interacting with each other and causing cascading effects are huge things. And as one of the preeminent sort of invertebrate conservation organizations on the planet, we often get land management agencies and homeowners that are coming to us for suggestions. What should we do to save these animals? But unfortunately, where we are with insects and bees, it is decades behind where we are for mammals and birds in terms of our understanding of their biology and ecology. We just don't have the baseline data sets that let us know how these animals are doing, or even how they were doing 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. We have a very limited understanding of sort of where they've been detected before, but virtually no understanding of what a healthy population looks like. And so, this is something that we need to build now so that we can get a snapshot in time as to how these animals are doing now, but then also be able to look forward and 10 years from now, be able to look back in time and say, okay, have things changed? We wouldn't be able to do that unless we collect these really valuable data sets. And in case you haven't seen this photo before or heard me talk about Robin Thorpe before, he's really what I call at least the grandfather of bumblebee conservation in North America, because I think he understood this to a certain degree. And once he became a emeritus professor at UC Davis, he started conducting long-term surveys of bumblebees in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And thank goodness he did, because it was his long-term baseline monitoring data set that really raised the red flag about the decline of bumblebees in North America. During his study, 2 species completely disappeared from his study sites, and allowed him to sort of raise the red flag and say, hey, we're seeing some really serious issues with bumblebee conservation. Is anybody else noticing anything? And sure enough, shortly thereafter, we started to learn that there were a number of bumblebee species in North America that were in really rapid decline. And those 4 species that were early, that Robin helped raise the red flag about, 2 of them have been added to the Endangered Species Act. One of them was petitioned for endangered species protection and determined that listing was not warranted. And then the 4th species was also petitioned for endangered species listing, and that species is in process, the Western bumblebee, and its decision is due out sometime in the next federal fiscal year. So certainly the ability to have these baseline data sets and react to known declines in bumblebees or other taxa is really, really, really important. So this is important for a number of different reasons. I just sort of described from an endangered species protection or from being able to institute conservation action. It's really important to know how animals are doing. It's also really important because a lot of people are trying to do science, looking at these different issues. People are trying to understand broadly why bumblebees are declining. And one of the leading sort of hypotheses for this, or certainly a question that people are asking, is what is the effect that climate change is having on these bumblebees? And this is a paper that came out in 2020 that sort of looked at bumblebee data sets across North America and Europe, and it looked at climate change with these and sort of asked the question, is the decline that we're seeing in bumblebees related to the change that we're seeing in climate? And they sort of determined that, yes, indeed, there was a huge decline in this, and that a lot of it was due to climate issues. But when we sort of look behind the scenes at the data set that they have available to them, you can see that a huge majority of North America has is very cool in color here. And the cooler colors that you see means that there was really poor sampling effort. So we didn't even really have data to build this model off of, yet we're using this model to say that, you know, bumblebees are declining due to climate change. And I'm not trying to criticize what the authors of this paper did or their methodology. I'm just saying, if we want to be able to accurately predict the effects that climate change and other threats are going to have, we need to have better baseline understanding of how bumblebees or where bumblebees are living in order to address some of these major questions that are facing real conservation issues. As I mentioned before, with the rusty patch bumblebee and with the western bumblebee and Franklin's bumblebee, regulatory decisions about whether an animal should be considered endangered also depends on data and having real good population level data. This is a paper that came out about 3 years ago that sort of said, hey, the western bumblebee is in decline, but we don't have data from these areas where you see all of these diamonds. And one of the things that I'd like to pat ourselves on the back about is there aren't that many diamonds throughout much of the Pacific Northwest because of the work of so many people of this project that had contributed by 2020, that our survey effort need was relatively small in our 3-state area. But when you look at areas like North Dakota and South Dakota and Wyoming and Nevada and California and Arizona and New Mexico, you see a lot of huge diamonds that indicate a real lack of survey effort to try to make a regulatory decision about an endangered species. So we need to fill in some of these information gaps so that we can do a better job of conserving the animals and directing conservation resources towards the animals that need it. It could be that the western bumblebee is endangered and needs protection, but we don't know that if we don't have better data, and we wouldn't want to put our resources toward protecting that species if indeed it was stable. And so we want to make sure that we have the best available science to institute the best conservation decisions and actions that we can with the limited resources that are available to us. Another reason that we're instituting these Bumblebee Atlas projects is because of the Bumblebee Specialist Group, which is I'm the red list authority for that Bumblebee Specialist Group for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And our job is to assess the extinction risk of all of the bumblebees on the planet. And the IUCN is similar to NatureServe, if you're familiar with that framework. And sort of what you're supposed to do is take the best available data that you have and ideally assess them and put them into one of these buckets about whether they're critically endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, or least concerned. And so because I was the red list authority for this, we entered into this process about a decade ago where we took the data that was available at the time and we tried to assess sort of the extinction risk. And so what we did is we built polygons based on historic observations. And then the purple polygon here was on more recent observations, which left us with this polygon that sort of looked like what could be considered range loss for these animals. But when we looked closer, it was hard to tell whether this was real range loss or whether it was just that nobody had looked for bumblebees in those areas. And so it left us with real questions about whether we could truly consider absence in these areas that you see here, or whether it was just that nobody had looked. Because all of the data that we had available at the time didn't have what we call lack of detection data. It just had positive points on a map, but we couldn't positively or definitively say that someone had gone to an area and actually looked for bumblebees. Those data did not exist. So we were trying to compare sort of historic effort with current effort. I don't need to go into the details of these charts, but it gives you some idea. And so then again, we're left with this. From this process, we came up with this list of species that were endangered in North America. Many of them have been petitioned. And so then then what do we do about it, right? So we need to learn more about where these animals are so that we can do a better job of enacting on the ground conservation to reverse these trends and help these animals recover. Also, about a decade ago, the Xerces Society started a community science project, basically a shoestring project where we just developed these wanted posters for some of these rare species that Robin told us were in decline. And we've distributed these wanted posters all over North America. We encouraged folks to go out and look for these animals and, you know, try to find them and take a picture of them and then send me an email. Literally, I had an email address, you know, a decade ago where people were just sending me emails from all over the country of bumblebee pictures. And the vast majority of pictures that we got were not our target species, but a number of them were. And so this map here shows areas where our community scientists were able to find the Western bumblebee. And the areas that you see in red that are circled here are areas that professional scientists had done comprehensive surveys and not been able to detect that animal. And so what we learned is that community science was going to be a really valuable approach to conducting a broad survey effort across a really large geographic area. And it was going to be more effective than it would be for a team of scientists to go out and try to cover the area, which would really take us decades. Like if all of the panelists and I decided we were going to go survey Oregon, Washington, and Idaho together, just the four of us, it would literally take us 10 or 20 years to do a decent survey effort. And by the time we were done, we would have to, the data could have changed so much that it wouldn't be effective. So training folks and arming them with cameras and getting them on the landscape, we recognized was going to be a really effective way to gather data. And so at that time, which was around 2014, we launched Bumblebee Watch, which was an effort to track all species of bumblebees. And instead of having folks send me an email, we had all of a sudden a web platform where people could log on and share their information with us. And for the first 3 years of the project, we gathered a ton of data. We got something like 15,000 observations in the first 4 years from 2013 to 2017. But when I started looking at the maps, I recognized that all we were really doing was mapping population density. So if you look at this map here, you can pretty easily pick out the Willamette Valley, you can pick out the Puget Trough, you can, you know, pick out the Front Range of Colorado, you can pick out San Francisco and Los Angeles, you can pick out New York and Ontario, where there's a lot of people. But in between those areas, there's very little survey effort. And particularly if you sort of zoom in on the eastern half of Washington and Idaho, or I'm sorry, the eastern half of Washington and Oregon, as well as the majority of southern Idaho, there was almost no data at all. And to try to make regulatory decisions or conservation decisions or management decisions, you know, based on this lack of data was really not going to be an effective way to move forward. So we realized we needed to develop a better way to do this. And so just to summarize sort of the justification for doing this Atlas project, we know that bumblebees are essential pollinators. We know that baseline data sets are essential for monitoring changes in populations. We know that some North American bumblebees are imperiled, but we want to be able to prioritize how to take care of which ones first. Essentially, we're trying to be triage nurses here. And we're lacking clear distribution information, especially recently. It's a lot of current or recent effort is based on human population density. And all of these data points that we had previously also didn't have habitat associations with them. So really hard to gather information about which types of habitat are important if you don't have those data. And so that's when we launched the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, which was in 2018. And since then, we have really had a phenomenal response to our program. We've had more than 1,200 people that have participated to this program. We've gathered over 39,000 bumblebee records of 24 different species across the 3-state area. We've gathered more than 1,000 observations of rare and imperiled species like the Western bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis, and Morrison's bumblebee, Bombus morrisoni. And you all have conducted more than 2,900 habitat surveys, which means a full sort of 45-minute survey. We've had almost 3,000 of those conducted over the last 5 years in the 3-state area. And what this has done is it's taken a 3-state area that had a huge portion of it that was relatively unsampled, and we filled in those gaps. So that huge area that was relatively unsampled is now incredibly well sampled. And most significantly, at least from my perspective, not only do we have these colored dots, which are actually bumblebee observations, but we also have these blank squares that you see throughout much of the sagebrush steppe in southeastern Oregon and a lot of southern Idaho. So those blank squares that you see there are areas where someone has gone to conduct a survey and they have not detected any bumblebees. But we can still put a point on the map there and say, hey, someone went and looked and had 0 detection of bumblebees. And that's a lot more information than just a blank spot on a map. And it provides a huge opportunity for us to assess extinction risk, as well as us to better understand which habitats are important for these animals. And likewise, we've gotten, as I mentioned before, a number of detections of these rare species that are going to help us to make on-the-ground conservation decisions directed towards these highly imperiled animals. So as I mentioned, we've now surveyed, for the first 5 years, we've surveyed 503 of our 528 grid cells. So the vast majority have been surveyed. I just want to take a minute here and I'll let Joel humble brag behind his blocked video, but you'll notice that the entire state of Idaho has been surveyed. So hats off to Idaho and their phenomenal effort, and for not just Joel, but for all of you that are joining us from Idaho that have contributed to this survey effort. Really amazing accomplishment. And our goal this year is to try to close those gaps and fill in those last 25 grid cells in Washington and Oregon. So that's our hope for this coming year, is to fill in those last few grid cells so that we can completely have surveyed our entire area. And I'll let you know what it takes to survey a grid cell a little bit later. A little bit more about what we've learned about bumblebees since we launched this project. Where are we finding them? This data is a little old at this point, but it hasn't changed that much either. So what we see here is where surveys took place is in gray, and then so the proportion of surveys are in gray in those different habitat types, and then the proportion of bumblebees, the proportion of surveys are in blue. So in other words, around sort of 13 or 14% of surveys have taken place in forests and woodlands. Around 16% have taken place in scrub, and around 22 or 23% have taken place in grasslands. And then the gray tell us where we're actually finding those bumblebees. So what this tells us is that we're sort of finding bumblebees proportional to where we would expect in woodlands and forests. But in scrub, we've done a lot more surveys than we've found bumblebees. So this tells us that scrub is probably a limited habitat, or only a subset of species are actually using these habitats. Conversely, in grassland and meadows, we've had around 22 or 23% of our surveys, but we found almost 35% of our bumblebees in those habitats, which indicates that grassland and meadows are exceptionally important for foraging habitat for bumblebees. And I think it's really important to recognize this. And something that I think is sort of under talked about in the conservation world is foraging habitat is not all that matters for bumblebees, right? While we may be finding them only in grasslands, it may be the adjacent woodland forest areas that are actually also important for nesting and overwintering. And those habitats, a bumblebee can't complete its life cycle without all three of those different habitat types. So we need nesting, overwintering, and foraging. And sort of those nesting and overwintering habitat types is a sort of missing survey effort or missing level of understanding that we're not necessarily getting to in this project, and something that we need to be thinking more about. And we are, just not directly sort of in the face of this project. Another thing that we've learned is that where different bumblebees are found differs by species. So some species, like Bombus appositus here, or I'm sorry, like Bombus appositus, seems to really like grasslands and meadows. Bombus atkensis seems to be found highly in developed areas. Same with Bombus vagans. Bombus van Dijkii seems to be found in woodland and forests. Okay, and so different species seem to have different habitat types, and this is important in thinking about conservation down the road. How are our Pacific Northwest bumblebees faring at a species by species level? One thing that we've learned so far is sort of a real quick overview is that things differ from year to year. So for instance, for Bombus bifarius here on the top, each one of these different shapes and colors represents a different year of the project. So year 1 is 2018 and year 5 is 2022. So in year 1, we didn't find that many Bombus bifarius, but in the 4 years since then, it's been much more abundant in our collections. And, some questions about why that might be. Does it have to do with survey effort? Does it have to do with that species actually having a bad year in the first year? And this is one of the reasons it's really important to do these surveys through time. Similarly, Bombus valsnicii has had 2 years. It seems to be an even year specialist. It does well in years 2 and 4, but less well in 1, 3, and 5. And why is that? Same thing with Rufocinctus, seemed to have one really good year in 2020. It was a COVID bee, apparently. And then Occidentalis last year, 2022, had a really good year. The best relative abundance we've ever seen for that species happened in 2022. So one of the things that we've been thinking about here is particularly with 2022 and Bombus occidentalis is last year, if you remember, and we're participating in the project, we were really explicit that we wanted the Western boat. We wanted you to go find that species. We told you to go find it. We gave you polygons to help you go find it. And sure enough, you went out and found it. So this tells us that sort of our ask of you is that you're all listening and following that, and that these things work. It isn't necessarily sort of an independent observation, right? So that's another reason why it's important to have a long series of data so that we can get a really clear average for how that species is doing. We can also compare things about across states with a project like this, and notice that some species vary widely and how often they're found in different states. And I've marked a few of them on the graph here. So Bombus valsnicii, super common in Oregon, fairly common in Washington, and absent for the most part from Idaho. This is only from 2022. We have detected Bombus valsnicii in Idaho, but we did not in 2022. Same thing with Griseocolus, or actually kind of the opposite. It's found quite commonly. 10% of the observations in the state of Idaho are Bombus griseocolus, and it's relatively rare in Oregon and Washington. Same thing with Rufocinctus. It seems to be quite common. Over 5 to 6 to 7% of the bees in Rufocinctus or in Idaho are Rufocinctus, and it's pretty rare in Oregon and Washington. So it's really interesting to look at these things in space and in time, and these are how we're analyzing the data. Also, just sort of generally looking at this, how are different species doing through time? So this is a sort of complicated chart. The gray dots in the background represent the years of the project. So the lighter gray is 2018, the darkest gray is 2022. And then the blue diamond there is the average of all of those different years. So in terms of relative abundance across years is the blue diamond there. And then the red triangle is the historic data. So if I go back and look at the historic data that was available, it tells us the relative abundance of different species. And so from this, there appear to be some different winners and losers through time, which is not surprising. We sort of knew that some species were doing well and some species not so well. But the names of those species, some of them are fairly surprising. So if we look at our winners, species like Bombus bifarius, no big surprise. This is the most common bee we found. It seems to be doing better than it has been historically. Same thing with Bombus flavifrons. We find it, more often now than was historically. Cruziacolus also seems to be increasing. Same with Nevadensis and vagans. So, and some interesting species here. Vagans is very interesting as we've really increased our understanding of that species. Historically, it was found relatively rarely in eastern Washington, and we find it relatively common even in the North Cascades region of Washington, all the way to the east there, much more common than it was historically. And then there's also some losers, and I think the names on this list are for the most part expected, except the one that's not is Bombus mixtus. You'll notice that there's been a huge drop in relative abundance from Bombus mixtus from historic to current time periods. And we don't know why this is. This is a species that really hasn't been on anybody's radar. But one of those reasons, this is one of those observations that makes me just incredibly glad that we're doing a project like this, where we can keep our finger on the pulse of this animal. It could be that the historic data is an outlier. It could be that our survey is an outlier, but this is definitely a species that we want to keep our eye on. Now, it's still found in 10%, 10% of the bees that we're finding. So I'm not overly concerned that the species is going to go extinct in the near future. In fact, I have it in my backyard right now. But, it's definitely a species that I'm thinking about and wasn't, 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't even on my radar. Bombus occidentalis, you can see historically was, 7, 8, 9% of observations and is currently closer to 2 or 3% of observations. So that's a significant decline that we knew about, but we're also very concerned about. As we think about recovering some of these, we've taken those SGCN, those species of greatest conservation need, like with the Western bumblebee and Morrison's bumblebee, and we've built these plant lists that will help land managers to help these species recover. These are plant lists that could be used as we build habitat, across our 3-state area to help provide pollen and nectar through time. And then we've developed, from the first iteration of the atlas, we developed these management guidelines that have case studies and plant lists and talk about how to best manage land for bumblebees. These are available on the PNW Bumblebee Atlas website if you haven't seen them yet. And talks about the life cycle and different habitat types. And we get into the differences between foraging habitat and nesting habitat and overwintering habitat and why those things are important and how close they probably are in space. And then we also published summaries for all of our different species. So we took each individual species and we put the data together and we've looked at where they're found, their phenology, their elevation profile, species distribution models. And we're looking forward to updating these after the coming field season. So I want to go out there and get as much more data as we can so that we can refresh and update these to have the latest and best information available for land managers and for all of you who are out there and interested in these animals. And then really significant from my perspective, this Atlas project, the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas project, has planted a seed. Since we launched in 2018, the Xerces Society is now running these Atlas projects in 15 different states. We are nearly coast to coast. There's a fairly decent opportunity that we may be expanding into 4 or 5 additional states in 2024. So this is taking off across North America. And a couple of years ago, I would have told you we have filled a huge information gap in the Pacific Northwest. And in a short period of time, we will have filled information gaps in nearly 50% of the geographic area of the lower 48 states, which is a phenomenal accomplishment. And I will just say, all of you are the reason that I'm able to say all of this stuff. We threw this project out into the world with the hopes that people would take it up, and they all did, or you all did. The response in volunteer time and effort has been just remarkable. I am every year at the end of the year when I go to verify photos and analyze data. I just can't believe how many of you have spent so much time dedicated to these animals. And I want to let you know, I know I tried to say this in the emails that we sent out and the communications that we send out. I appreciate it more than you could possibly know. It warms my heart and gives me joy to think about the community that we're building, and the effort that we've built together. And just thank you really honestly from the bottom of my heart for contributing to this project. It is a truly an amazing effort. Everybody that I tell about it is just blown away by the accomplishments that we've done together. So that was a word salad of emotion, but really, truly, honestly, thank you for all that you've done for this project, and all that you will continue to do for this project. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. All right, so that's sort of why we started and what we've learned so far. I'm now going to just give you a brief sort of few slides, just talking about how we can wrap this thing up. What can we learn in the next 3 months, starting on June 1st? How can we fill in some of these gaps and just make sure the information that we have is the best that we could possibly have? So I just have a few slides that hopefully will illuminate this, and then we'll talk about it in more detail in module 2. So just sort of big picture wise, this is a graph that shows, again, using that historic data that was available to us, we were able to build species richness maps by level 3 ecoregion. And you can see throughout, much of our ecoregion, we had, 19 or 20 species used to exist throughout much of our 3-state area. And we have the survey effort now, the number of data points that are available from the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas are now higher than the historic. So the survey effort in the last 5 years is higher than the historic survey effort. But we've seen a fairly dramatic drop in species richness in individual ecoregions. So some of them are doing, relatively fine. The North Cascades, the Columbia Plateau, the Blue Mountains. These are some of the areas that seem to be, doing better than others. But there's some areas where we've lost significant portions of these, and the Willamette Valley is one of them. We've lost, like something like 5 or 6 species from the Willamette Valley, and the same thing from the Cascades. Sorry, in case you're not quite familiar, this is the Willamette Valley here, this big white area. And then the Cascades ecoregion runs north-south, east of the Willamette Valley, between Oregon and Washington. We've also lost, a number of species in that ecoregion. And so, we've been sort of brainstorming, if we've done such a wonderful job, surveying these areas, can we really say that we've lost all of these species? And we might, these species, especially in the Willamette Valley, where there are, a lot of threats going on, there's a lot of growth happening, there's a huge, there's a lot of agricultural use with pesticides and likely spreading diseases and other things. And so, the Willamette Valley might be real. But the Cascades, we really wanted to look, like, have we really surveyed the Cascades and other mountain ranges well enough that we can really say that species have been lost from there? And in some cases, it makes sense. Like 1 or 2 species lost from the Cascades would make sense. We sort of recognize, unfortunately, that the Suckly cuckoo bumblebee, doesn't really seem to be around anymore. We haven't detected it anywhere, in the 5 years of the project. Same thing with Franklin's bumblebee, down here in the Siskiyous. That's one species that we can say is potentially gone, but 6 species is a lot to be lost from relatively intact habitat. And so we started looking at the data in different ways to help us sort of understand what could we do better. And this is another fairly complicated chart, so I'm sorry, but I do feel like it's fairly informative. What we have here on the x-axis is longitude. So essentially at the far west here, or the far left, this is the coast. And then this would be the eastern border of Idaho over here. And you can see the elevation here on the y-axis. So you can see sort of the elevation profile as you travel from west to east through Oregon and Washington, and then over into Idaho. You can see that you sort of start raising up through the plateau where you get sort of a low floor for these. Each individual dot that you see on this map is essentially a place where a small portion of the states that have been surveyed. The size of the dot that you see there represents how many bumblebees have been observed, so that the big circles there would be on the order of 250 bumblebees have been observed. And then the small ones are, less than 50. And then, also the color of this, the more red, the more species, the more black, the fewer species. And you can see that if we look sort of here, we can assume that in this steep incline of elevation of average, and the green line here is average elevation across the gradient. So here on this steeper line here, this is going to be the slope of the Cascades. So the Cascade Mountains are here. And we can see that there's a lot, if we look through here, there's a fair decent survey effort, but each survey effort is relatively small, right? So many of these points are just one observation where we just captured a few bees. So we maybe haven't gotten enough bees to truly get the species diversity there. Same thing over here in the Rockies, right? There's a fair decent survey effort that's taken place throughout a lot of Idaho at higher elevations, but a lot of them are really, maybe a single survey has been done in a lot of these smaller areas, which we all know, or I think we know fairly well, that like a single effort probably isn't going to detect all of the species that are there. And I think most of you could probably tell us this as you've returned to the same site a second and maybe a third time. You're finding new species when you go back to those new areas. The second time you go back, or you go back 3 or 4 weeks later, the species have changed. And so we wondered if this was, something that was important and significant. And sure enough, if we look at this graph, another fairly complicated chart that shows us bumblebee abundance by species richness, what we learn from this is that in a single area, in order to sort of get the full host of number of species in an area, we need to capture likely somewhere between 75 and 100 bees. That's where you see this sort of species accumulation curve start to level off. So, if we think about a single survey of getting sort of between 10 and 20 bees, 2 surveys or 1 survey just isn't going to be enough. We need to get, closer to 5 to 10 surveys, or maybe even 7 to 10 surveys to really be able to say that we fully sampled one of these smaller grid cells. And sure enough, we see those data sort of bear out. Now we have number of surveys here and species richness. So instead of number of bees, we have number of surveys. And you can see that it starts to plateau right around 10. So 10 surveys of one of these grid cells is an area that, that's where we start to learn that all of the species in a given area. And we knew this when we started. We've sort of asked you all to adopt a grid cell, and the answer has been sort of two surveys in a 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer grid cell. I think we all knew that this was insufficient, and we've told you from the beginning that we were hoping for more than that. And you've given us many more than this. There are a lot of grid cells that have been sampled 5, 10, 15, even 20 different times. But we're trying to sort of highlight some areas where we're hoping to go out this summer and gather a bit more information. And so one of the interesting things here, this is another complicated graph, but this is basically the 3-state area. You can see the ecoregion map underneath here, where we have the ecoregions that are in decline, essentially. This is how many species have been lost from the Cascades and the Willamette Valley. And then on top of that is our grid cell map. And some of the grids are colored brown. The colored brown are one that have had at least 5 surveys in them. So we've gotten close to our sort of survey, sort of minimum survey effort in these grid cells. But when we zoom in, and I'll do this a little bit later when I show you the website, that even those places that have had fairly decent survey effort, they're missing the high elevation spots. So we just need folks to maybe just go a little bit higher in elevation and repeat some of this survey effort, or, you know, some of these grid cells in the Cascades really haven't been surveyed all that well at all. So these are some of the areas that we're hoping to go out. And if you can see this map, you'll also see some green fuzzy areas. So what Joel and Taylor and Julie and I have done is we've actually gone through the 3-state area, and we've tried to select high quality habitat at higher elevations where we're hoping that folks are going to go out and survey. And I will show you in more detail a little bit later how to find those on the map so that you can help find those areas and potentially find your way and navigate up there. We understand that going to high elevation isn't going to be for everybody. Some of you just may not be able to hike, you know, up to 6,000 feet, or you might not have a vehicle that'll get you on the road up there. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you have to do that in order to participate. We're just saying, like, if you want to help us go the extra mile this summer, this is where we want you to go. We want you to go to these high elevation areas and help us fill these survey gaps so that we can hopefully detect some of the species that we haven't yet found in the Atlas project, and maybe find something that's never been seen before. There's a species that Joel and I were just talking about, Bombus curbielis, that's a high elevation bee. It's an albino bombus that's never been detected in the state of Oregon. And it would be super, super cool to go find it. So this is where our survey effort will take us in 2023. I'm going to go into more detail in the next module, but I have been blabbering on here for about an hour, and I'm going to stop. And I'm going to maybe see if there's any questions. And if there aren't, we'll just take a little quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about how to participate. So any questions that are out there that I need to address, team?
There's nothing in the chat in the question or answer box right now, Rich.
Okay.
Yep. Same thing.
Well, fantastic. I must have just been clear as mud for everybody. Or everybody went to sleep from my fancy charts. But hopefully we're all on the same page here and understanding each other. And let's just take a quick 5-minute break. So it's 6:37 right now on my clock. Let's try to come back at 6:42. Go get yourself a cold drink or go to the bathroom, and we'll get started again in about 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, baby, I'm on a 5-minute pee break. Give everybody a break for 5 minutes. Oh. How was dinner? Did you have a good one?
Okay. 5 minutes goes fast. Maybe faster for me than all of you. I did see that a question popped up in the Q&A here while during the break. Someone asked how old the data are for the historic data for the graph, which is a great question, and sorry that I didn't address it in real time. This is a database that was amassed by Leif Richardson to build the Bumblebees of North America database to make that guidebook that we recommend. You'll see a picture of it in a minute here. It goes back to the early 1800s, and there's currently around 600,000 records, I think, in that database for all of North America. Yeah, so that's the data, that the historic data is basically all data prior to 2018. So it's the early, I think the earliest record in the Pacific Northwest, if I'm remembering correctly, is like 1819 or something. No, I think it's 1806 maybe. But anyway, it goes back over 200 years at this point. So it's an old data set. Okay, I'm going to get started with the second module here. We'll have more time, I think, to answer questions at the very end here. So if there's other questions you have, try to hold on. Will someone just verbally let me know if you can see my screen?
Yep.
Thanks, Taylor. Okay, here we go. How can you help? So you've sort of, hopefully you're on board. You probably already were on board, but thanks for being here. How can you help? From grid adoption to data entry. So this webinar is sort of meant to go talk to everybody out there, whether you're brand new to the project or whether you've been here since year one. So for some of you, some of this information may be a repeat, but we are going to sort of start at a baseline level as if you've sort of never interacted with the project before. All right, so what can you do to help? We're gonna go through essentially 4 different pieces here. We're gonna talk about Bumblebee Watch, which is our platform for gathering the data. Then I'll give you a website of the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, show you where to adopt a grid cell, show you where the resources are. And then we'll talk about conducting a survey, the planning you'll need to do, how to conduct a Bumblebee survey, how to do a habitat survey, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to submit all of that data online. So just real quickly, the URL here at the top should take you to the training modules, and you should be able to find a lot of the resources that you need on that page. So just from a pure basic level, the first thing that you'll need to participate in the project is to sign up for a Bumblebee Watch account. You need to go to bumblebeewatch.org. It's a community science platform that we use just for Bumblebee observations. It's run by the Xerces Society and some of our partners, mostly in Canada. You're just going to click sign up in the upper right-hand corner there that's circled in red, and just provide a username, an email address, and a password, and write those things down and remember them. And then you will get a profile page. And the most important part about this is just to remember your username. Your username is going to become important when you submit data and when you adopt grid cells. It helps us it's the sort of unique identifier that helps us keep everything together. So please remember your username, write it down if you need to, and use it regularly wherever we ask for it, and try to use it as accurately as you possibly can. It's sort of the thing we use to tie our databases together. So please do that carefully. All right, that shouldn't take very long. It should only take a few minutes to set up a Bumblebee Watch account. When you're done and you have your Bumblebee Watch account, then you can head over to the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas project. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to exit out of here, and I'm going to take you over to that website. and I'm just going to show you around. I'm going to give you a little tour, show you where you can find all the different resources. I'm going to show you where the new information is. There's been some updates recently, and so I'm going to hopefully just give you a quick walkthrough. Taylor, would you again just let me know if you can see my website here?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. So this is the home page here, where you can find, just the home page of the website. To find the recorded training. So if you wanted to go back and view any of this material in the future, you would just hover over training and then choose recorded trainings. And that would take you to the recorded training modules. There's all kinds of information on this page that will help you understand. There's an old ecology and conservation recording here. There's identification webinar that's been recorded here, as well as a version of what I'm talking about right now. So you don't have to memorize everything. The resources are here for you. In addition to this, if you go down to training materials, you'll see the equipment that you're going to need. We'll have the publications here, including the data sets, as well as other materials that are available to you. You can also go over to the resources, key resources page. This is going to have our participant handbook, which is really just this is sort of the main source of written information. If you're a person who learns by reading rather than listening over Zoom, this document was written for you. It basically walks us through everything we're talking about tonight, but has it written down with pictures and got clear guidance. The data sheet's also here, and for those of you that have been with us for a while, we do have a brand new data sheet this year. It has been streamlined so that everything is on a single page. It has the bumblebee and habitat data on a single data sheet. No need to keep two data sheets with you around anymore and worry about losing one of them. All the information will be on one sheet. If you click on the picture of it here, it will download that data sheet for you. And there's also actually an extra page that you can download here that if you end up with more bumblebees than is available spots on that sheet, you can write it down, or you can have that second data sheet with you. This is also where you'll find other helpful resources. You can find links to the different protocols, links to Bumblebee Watch, how to navigate using Google Maps, where to find nets and tools and files and all kinds of other things. There's also some news at the back, or news articles and podcasts and stuff that we've been on if you want to catch up on with the project. Down here is the Google My Maps. So if you want a copy of your own grid cell map, you can open up this link and then download a copy of that. And then there's also some more helpful videos that show you how to sort of plan a point or a roadside video at the bottom. So a ton of resources there. Once you're sort of familiar with all that and you feel like you're ready to commit to the project, you can go over here and think about adopting a grid cell. And to do that, you're going to go to Get Involved, and you'll click on 2023 grid cells. It says coming soon because I haven't updated the website, but it's actually fully updated now. Everything is here. You can see that our 2023 priorities are written here. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail in a little while. What's old is new, when it's hot, go high, and go where no one has gone before. And then down here is where you'll actually see our grid cell map. And I'm just to make it a little bit bigger for your screen, I'm going to click on this, which is going to take us to the grid cell map on just a bigger screen so that you can see it without having to squint, or hopefully see it a little bit better without having to squint. So this grid cell map is now for all of our Atlas projects. You'll see that it opens up with these bookmarks over here on the left. To get to the Pacific Northwest, you just click the Pacific Northwest bookmark, and then you can interact with the map as you would any other. You can scroll in and out using your scroll bar, or you can use the buttons here, the in and out buttons, or if you want to go back to the larger screen, you can hit that home button. Once you start zooming in, you'll get past the green and you'll actually see the priority grid cell map for this year. And if you click on the legend in the upper left-hand corner here, it'll actually show you what each of those colors means. So if it's a kind of a light green gray color, it has been surveyed. We've gotten 2 surveys on all of those grid cells, which is fantastic. That was sort of our minimum goal. If you see a light green color, it means we need 1 more survey in that grid cell. So if someone could head out and get that, that's fantastic. And then these dark green grid cells are actually have never been surveyed in the whole 6 years of the project, or 5 years of the project. So we're hoping to tackle those last few grid cells this year as well. If you zoom in even further, that is when the high elevation polygons will start to pop up. So you can start to see some of the grid cells where there is high elevation areas where we can go in and survey. And so if you zoom in a little bit further, you'll actually notice that the grid cell map will sort of turn off. There will still be the grid there, and you can still find the number of each grid cell, but you can now see the terrain underneath it. And so now you can see, as we zoom in here, you can start to see around the Three Sisters here in Central Oregon, you can start to see all of this red habitat that we've highlighted as being high elevation and also should be open grassland type habitat and available for surveys. So there's a lot of area in here, even within previously surveyed grid cells, for you to go in and try to do some high elevation surveys. So we're really hoping for you to use this as a guide. You know, once again, keeping in mind that high elevation surveys and mountainous areas are not going to be for everyone. But if you're the adventuresome type and you have the resources and knowledge and skill to go do this, this is how we're going to gather the best information in 2023. So those are how to find those targets. If you want to turn any layers off, you can click on this little hamburger menu over here. And then, for instance, you could turn off the different layers for the Pacific Northwest and just look at the surface of the ground, if that's something that you wanted to do. So that's the best way to interact with the grid map. When you find an area that you're interested in surveying, that's when you would remember this number here. So let's say I was interested in that grid cell I was just looking at where the Three Sisters were. I would remember Oregon 83, and I would go back to my grid cell website. And then down here, I would fill in this form, and this is where I would officially adopt a grid cell. So you'd say, I'm going to adopt a grid cell in Oregon, and you choose Oregon. And then you would go down and choose, Oregon 83. And you would select that, fill in the rest of the information. And then at the very bottom of this, you would click submit. And then you will have adopted your grid cell, and we will know that you've committed to conducting surveys in that grid cell for 2023. So that's how you would adopt a grid cell. And then the rest of the resources, you know, you can just poke around here. There's, you know, different, we have species illustrations. So if you're interested in identification and learning more about our different species, this page will show you the different species of greatest conservation need, and then information about common species. And then at the very bottom of this, there's also the handy dandy PNW Bumblebee color morph chart that I put together back at the launch of this project. And you can download that from this page as well. So hopefully that gives you sort of a sense for the website and how to navigate in and around that. I'm now going to jump back into the training module here, and we'll proceed with that information. Let me start sharing my screen again. Okay, looks like we're good there. All right, so again, PNW Bumblebee Atlas is where you're going to find all that stuff that I just showed you. So where do we want you to conduct surveys in 2023? We've got 3 separate priorities for you. We're saying what's old is new. And what we mean by what's old is new is we want you to go back this year, especially in the early part of the year in early June when low elevation sites are in prime condition. We want you to go back to the first place or places that you conducted the survey and conduct the survey in that exact same location again. We want you to do this because repeated surveys in the same area really will give us a lot of really good information about a number of different things. One, like how well did our survey effort capture the species that were at an area? Like, was it a good enough survey effort, or should we have more time or less time? Those are things that we can get if you go back to that original location. We'll also see if there's been any changes. If your original site was 5 years ago, we'll know if some species has been lost or some new species has been found there. And we'll learn new information about the management and things that may have impacted that. So what's old is new is how we'd like you to start. Go back to that first place that you conducted a survey. And if you're brand new to the project, then the whole world is your oyster. You can choose whatever grid cell you'd like, what your favorite area to go conduct the survey, and then go conduct a survey in that area. Our second priority is to go green. So if you feel like you want to go travel to Southwestern Oregon or to Eastern Washington or to Southeastern Oregon and hit some of these green cells that need 1 or 2 more surveys, we'd love you to do that. That would be fantastic. A lot of these are in beautiful parts of the states and worthy of a trip. So would certainly encourage you all to do this if you have the resources and time to head out there. And then finally, our last priority is when we get to, especially this year where there's a heavy snowpack in a lot of our high elevation areas, when it gets hot, go high. So come late July, early August, mid-August, this is when we'd love you to think about some of those higher elevation areas, which are the red polygons that you see on this map, and try to seek out some of these higher elevation sites. Again, you may not feel like that's for you, and that's fine. If that's the case, just focus on priority 1 or priority 2. You don't need to do priority 3. It's just for those folks that are super go-getters and want to be a special help to the project. This is what we're hoping for this year. So I hope those 3 priorities are clear. I hope the map makes it clear. And if you need more help or guidance around that, of course, I'm available, and so are all the panelists on the team here. Just want to do a special note about Franklin's bumblebee. Franklin's bumblebee is a endangered species. It's federally listed now. It is therefore has federal protection. The Fish and Wildlife Service has recognized that survey effort is the number one need for this species. But if you think that you are fully legal to go look for this species and handle it, that is okay for you to do at this point. That may change if we find it. The service may come in and ask us to change our practices, but right now we have full permission to go do surveys. But if during your survey you think you may have handled this bee and you're going to submit a record of it, we're asking that you do 3 things. Number 1 is to not scream to the entire planet that you found it. And the reason for that is we don't want to love this bee to death. It has not been seen since 2006. And we do not want to all of a sudden have people flocking from all over the world to the location where you found it and destroy the habitat and destroy one of the last colonies for this species. So please don't tell anybody about it, except for me. I get to find out. I'd really appreciate it if you could send me an email and just say, hey, I think I may have found Franklin's bumblebee. Here's the URL of my Bumblebee Watch record. Likewise, when you upload the record to Bumblebee Watch, please mark that record as private. I'll show you how to do that here in a second, but we just don't want to have these records publicly available. And when you mark it as private, it will mean that only a subset of people can actually look at this. So this will mean when you're actually in Bumblebee Watch and adding your photos, to mark it as private, you're going to click that circled box at the bottom that says private, and that will maintain that record and keep it available only to project administrators. you have any questions about this, please let me know. Again, please let us know if you think you found Franklin's bumblebee. There's no harm there. We do want to find it. It's the #1 need. So please go look for it down there in southwestern Oregon. And if you find it, please let me know. Along with that, one of the things that we really want to be doing with is to keep our bumblebees safe is to making sure that we're sterilizing our equipment. We want to make sure that all of your jars are clean. So it's a good time of year to go clean them all from last year. If you haven't cleaned them yet, use a mild bleach solution or an alcohol solution or hydrogen peroxide or even hot soapy water and just let them air dry. And we want to do this every time. If you're going to be serving at the same location, if it's in your backyard, you probably don't need to do this in between every survey. But if you're going to be hopping in your car and driving 50 miles or further than a bee would fly, we really want to sterilize our equipment in between each survey. We want to make sure that we're not the ones that are moving diseases between sites. Within a site, I think bees are probably moving diseases more than we possibly could. So I don't think you need to worry too much about that within a site. But between sites, we want to make sure to sterilize our equipment. It's also a good idea to just wash your net from time to time, and in between locations is a good choice. Hot soapy water, just rinse it and let it air dry. We also want to limit the time that bees are in vials at ambient temperature. So out in the environment, you want to limit the amount of time that they're in those jars. They can overheat, especially on a sunny, hot day in a relatively short period of time. We also want to make sure to leave our bees in the cooler for less than 2 hours, for not more than 2 hours. So less than 2 hours is fine. More than that, we start to worry a little bit. So please try to keep it less than 2 hours. That should give you plenty of time to capture your bees and chill them, and then take photographs of them. And then finally, we want you to release the bees near to where you captured them. So, within 100 meters or so, within your hectare space is fair game, no problem there. We just don't want to be sort of doing a roadside survey and traveling 10 miles down the road and releasing bees, 10 miles from where we found them. These are our best handling practices. All right. So now we're getting ready to think about conducting a survey. So this is sort of a workflow for how to do that, what it means to conduct a survey. So first we want to sort of plan. And as I mentioned before, the Google My Map that I showed you on the website that you can download and make your own is a resource that is available to you. I would encourage you to make a copy of it if you want to have a digital map for yourself. If you sort of click on the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner there of that white box, you can choose copy map or export to KML, KMZ, and then you can get a copy of the grid cell map that you can navigate and mark up however you would like. Our surveys, when you adopt a grid cell, we ask that you commit to conducting 2 surveys within that grid cell between June and August. The reason that we wait until June is because while there are some early species that are emerging and probably out in the areas where you are right now, most species do not have workers that are active. And we want to wait until most species have workers out so that we can detect the most number of species that we possibly can. So 2 surveys between June and August. And then we stop at the end of August because males can be very difficult to identify from photographs. And so we try to stop our surveys at the end of August. It could be that your environment is dried up and inappropriate, sort of mid-August. So don't let our project-wide survey window serve as the only golden time period for you to survey, especially at the end of the survey window. If conditions aren't, if there's nothing flowering and you haven't seen a bee flying for a week, chances are things are pretty senesced in that area and not the best location to do a survey. Optimal conditions for surveys are sort of pleasant temperatures for humans. So sort of between 60 and 90 degrees, more than 90, things get too hot, less than 60 and things are too cold. You want to avoid high windy situations and don't want to conduct surveys while it's raining. Most of the survey areas that we would like you to go to are natural areas. You can certainly use roadsides, and you can certainly survey in some urban areas, but remember that the reason that we started this project was to get away from population centers and away from rights of way and transportation corridors. So while power line corridors could be a great place to do a survey, a major highway, maybe less so. But anywhere that you want to contribute is great. I'm just sort of telling you the best places to survey. Most importantly, we want to make sure that you're following all posted rules and regulations and being safe. Most notably, we want to make sure that we're only conducting surveys on areas where we have permission to do so. So if you're going to be on private land, you need to make sure that you have explicit permission from the landowner or the land manager to be there. Public lands are for the most part fair game, although there's some caveats there, and I'll share those for you in a second. But yeah, we really want to be careful to avoid trespassing on any private property, so please follow posted regulations. The best places to survey is Forest Service land, BLM land. In Oregon, we have a permit to conduct surveys in most state parks. It's different in each state, so please, if you have questions about Idaho or Washington, please contact Julie, Taylor, or Joel for information there. The same with state wildlife areas. Obviously, if you have a big backyard, you could use your backyard. Local parks and natural areas, you'd want to check with the local land manager. Most people are very amenable to this and are excited about it. But it is something that you should check with the local land manager about instead of just marching onto public land and doing a survey. Along with that, national parks. So last year, we finally got permits to conduct surveys in national parks. These are only available to folks that are named individuals on this permit. So because we have a permit does not mean that you can go. You need to actually get your name on these permits. So please, if you are interested in this, there's an email address there. Please send an email to that address. Even if you were involved last year in a national park, you need to get re-added to the permit this year. So please send an email address to pnwbumblebeeatlas@xerces.org, and I will coordinate with you to get you added to a national park site. A lot of these are great places to access high elevation sites. So let me know if you're interested. The materials that you will need, you'll need the data sheets from the website and pencils or pens. You'll need an insect net and vials, cooler with crushed ice. And just a note here, last year we had some bee mortality, not in the Pacific Northwest, but in California. There were a number of people that were using the really cold, I think Yeti was the brand, ice packs, and they had really cold freezers that were cooling those ice packs well below freezing, and that was too cold for bees. So we really want you to be using crushed ice, from a normal freezer, not from some super frozen situation. So crushed ice from grocery stores or hotels, those places are great and perfect, but try to avoid the use of blue ice, particularly the super chilled blue ice that are available on the market today. You'll need a camera and a smartphone, a GPS unit to collect data, a timer or a smartphone or a watch to keep time. Ideally, some way to get weather. You can use an app on your phone to gather local weather, that's fine. Plant and bumblebee field guides are helpful, and also having paper maps. There's a lot of our region that it does not have cell service, and we don't want you to get stuck out somewhere and not be able to navigate to where you're going or how to get back. Last year, we started delivering volunteer lanyards for folks to give them some official recognition. We're doing the same this year. If you didn't get one last year and you're interested, there's a QR code here. Joel, I think there's also a link to this URL on that sheet that I shared with you with links. If you could drop that in the chat so folks could get the link if they'd like to sign up for a lanyard, just go ahead and fill out that information. And we're going to mail those out right around June 1st. and get you sort of official recognition. There's also a surveyor placard that you can put on your dashboard. That's available to download from the resources page of the website. Okay, so that sort of handles planning. We're going to talk now about conducting a survey and what that looks like. The best kind of survey to do is a point survey. What is a point survey? Within your 50 by 50 kilometer grid cell, you're going to pick a single hectare where you're going to conduct your survey. A hectare is around 2.5 acres, which is about the same as 2 football fields side by side. So the length of a football field square. It's also about the size of a soccer field or the infield of a running track, like an official Olympic sized running track. The infield would be about a hectare, just to give you some visual idea of how big that is. And then you're going to survey for 45 person minutes. What this means is you're going to go look for bumblebees for 45 minutes. And you're going to keep your timer running. And every time you capture a bee, you are going to pause your timer until you get that bee in the cooler and start looking for bumblebees again. And then you're going to restart your timer and you're going to have 45 minutes of actively searching for bumblebees, not 45 minutes of trying to get bees from a net into a jar. That time doesn't count. It's only active searching minutes. The other thing, but we mean by person minutes, is if you do this with 2 or 3 people, it won't be 45 minutes long. It'll be 45 total search minutes. So if there are 3 of you, you're going to have, each of you would have 15 search minutes within the hectare. If there's 2 of you, each of you would have 22.5 search minutes. And that's how long your timer would be. So keep that in mind. The completion of a single point survey is going to be 1 45-minute bumblebee survey and then 1 habitat assessment. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. A roadside survey is possible and something you can do. It's essentially 5 mini point surveys. You're going to select a 10-mile stretch of road. You're going to select 5 points along the side of that road, and you're going to do a 15 person minute survey at each site. So the completion of a roadside survey is 5 15-minute bumblebee surveys and 5 habitat assessments along a 10-mile stretch of road. Each of those mini points needs to be separated by at least a half a mile as the crow flies. So if there's a big U-turn in the road, you don't want to have the survey be sort of right on the other side of it. You want to be separated by at least a half mile as the crow flies. This is what the bumblebee data sheet looks like. So you're going to enter all of your site information at the top. Although this is a little bit outdated now because we've got the new data sheet, which I have a screenshot of a little bit later. But you're going to fill out sort of this information at the top that tells us about the location of your site and the information that and the method that you used. Oh no, sorry, this is the new data sheet. I'm seeing it now. I was thinking it was the old one, but this is the new data sheet. You can see it's streamlined. It's got the site information, the bumblebee survey information, and the habitat information all in one place, which is great. It streamlines things and will be a lot less for those of you. There's a video that we made a couple of years ago. It's called Conducting Surveys for Bumblebee Atlas Projects. It is available on YouTube. I'm not going to show it during this webinar. It's about 20 minutes long. And it shows you how to conduct a survey. It basically walks you from A to Z. It gives you tips for transferring bees from nets into jars. And it's available for you to watch on YouTube. It's available from our resources page. And I would highly, if you've not ever done this before, I would highly encourage you to go out and use this resource and watch it and carefully pay attention and learn from it. And if you have questions, please reach out. And then you're going to conduct a habitat assessment. Usually when I'm done with my bumblebee survey, sometimes I leave my bumblebees in the cooler and I let them chill. And while they're chilling so that I can take photographs of them, I can conduct my habitat survey. And these usually takes 5 to 15 minutes. And it's just some real quick questions about, the area that around you, and how it may contribute to bumblebees. This should be fairly rapid. It shouldn't take you several hours to do this. Again, it should be less than a half hour. It may take you a little longer if you're not familiar with plants and other things, but really it should be a pretty rapid glimpse. So you're gonna, enter your site name at the top of that data sheet. And then you're gonna start entering the habitat information. So you're gonna include the habitat of the survey area. So what's the major habitat type where you're conducting a survey? And then what are up to the 3 most common visible habitat types surrounding your survey area. So take those same, 7 options of different habitat types and fill them in over there on the right-hand side. Then you're going to answer this question of, how much of the survey area had flowering resources available. This is not sort of a percent cover question. It's basically how much of the hectare were there flowering resources available for you to look for bumblebees on. So if you're standing in an area and you can see, a flower, that would sort of count towards that 100%. Doesn't have to be 100% cover per se. And then you're going to start looking at some of the nesting features. So we're going to start looking for bunch grasses and brush piles and evidence of rodent holes and tunnels. And these are nesting resources for bumblebees. They give us some indication of whether bumblebees might have enough nesting resources nearby. And then there's some questions about management. Do you see evidence of mowing or grazing or herbicide use or pesticide use or fire? You're going to answer those questions. And then we're going to ask you, how many plant species did you see in bloom? And you're going to circle that. And then we're going to ideally have you list as many of the species as you can that are available on the data sheet. So you're going to enter the common name. But ideally, we really want you to focus on the scientific name of the plant species, and just getting the genus is fine. There's an iNaturalist app called Seek that is fantastic for getting this level of detail from your plants, and I would highly recommend that you download and use this if you're not. If you're not sure what plant it is, you can take a picture of it and write that on the data sheet so that you can try to use some resources later to get it identified. And then at the bottom, we're just going to ask you to fill out your effort. How much time did you spend conducting your surveys? How many miles did you drive? And how many hours did you spend organizing your data? So please fill out that at the bottom of the data sheet. And this is what the extra data sheet that I mentioned looks like. It's got basically a bunch more places to add more bumblebee observations. So you can put your first site name in the boxes up here and then add additional bumblebee species. And then if you use a line of data to re-enter the site name, bumblebee atlas grid cell, and then date, here you can put information here for a second survey if you had additional bees from a second survey, and put those all on the same data sheet. And this would help you to reduce the amount of stuff you have to carry around. And then also on the back is this grid with the gray that we like folks to use to take their pictures on. This will help give a nice neutral background for you to take your detailed photographs of bumblebees. So we're getting close to the end here. Just so last few thoughts about photographing. So during your Bumblebee Atlas survey, in case I wasn't clear, you're going to capture it during those 45-minute search minutes. You're going to capture every bumblebee that you see, and you're going to put that bumblebee into a chilled cooler, and you're going to leave that bumblebee in the cooler long enough to initiate cold anesthesia. So if we make insects really cold, it will basically put them to sleep such that they won't be able to move. And then you can take detailed photographs of them, and then they will be able to warm up and fly away at the end of your survey and go back about their business. So it's a completely non-lethal survey method, and bumblebees are unharmed by this process as far as we know. When they're chilled, they won't be moving in the vial, and you'll be able to put them out onto that data sheet that I just showed you to take your photographs. When you're taking your photographs, you want to have these photos. In order to correctly or accurately identify bumblebees, I need to be able to see a clear photo of the head. And from the head, I really want to be able to see the hairs on the top of the head, the hairs on the front of the face. And then ideally, I also want to be able to see the length of the cheek. So this area over here below the eye and above the mandibles is really important for differentiating between different species. And if I can't see that, it makes it really hard to differentiate between a couple of close lookalikes. I also want to be able to see a picture of the thorax. I want to be able to see the entirety of the hair banding pattern between the wings, behind the wings, and in front of the wings. I also want to be able to see below the wings. Some species have black hair here, others have yellow, and that helps me differentiate between different species as well. Then also, I want to be able to see the abdomen, and I need to be able to see all of these turtle segments. If they have their wings folded over the back, it means that I can't see for some species, I can't see key features that I really need to be able to see. So please, if you need to, you can use a pencil or your fingers to pull those wings apart and get that clear picture. There's also some species that I really need to see T5 and T6 for, this back of the abdomen of the bumblebee. And a lot of people take photos that sometimes those segments are curled under, and I can't see those key segments sometimes for some species. So really making sure that I can see every last segment on that abdomen is incredibly important for identification. Please take the time to check your photographs when you're out in the field. Practice when you're at home. Make sure that you have the skill set with your camera and you're familiar enough with it to take high quality photos, and make sure after you've taken them that they're in focus. If you've spent 6 hours driving across the state of Oregon to get to the Owyhee Canyon to conduct a bumblebee survey, and then you spend an hour doing a bumblebee survey, and then you spend 15 minutes taking your photos, and they're all terrible, and then you drive home and submit your data, those 8 hours, all of a sudden those 24 hours of effort that you put in to do that survey, such amazing effort, a lot of that will have been lost if we can't actually identify the bumblebees in your photo. We don't need you to be able to identify the bees that you see, but we do need you to take high quality photos. So please go the extra effort and make sure that you're taking high quality photos. This can be done with, relatively inexpensive point and shoot cameras or with cell phones. It just takes time and effort and practice and making sure that you're in the right lighting conditions. So practice in your backyard, do whatever you can. Like I said before, if you feel like you need to, manipulate the bee and move it around as much as you possibly can. Move those wings apart. Don't be afraid of getting stung while the bees are chilled. It's okay to touch them and to move them around a little bit to get the photos that we need. If you've been participating in the project for a long time, let's say you submitted a bunch of bees in 2022 or 2021, what I would encourage you to do is to go look at your data. Go into your data. And if you had a bunch of bees that I identified as being female, but I was only able to identify them to species, so it just says Bombus spa, and it's a female bee, that means that I need you to try a little bit harder to take better photographs. And I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm really not. And it's only if it's a majority of it. There's some people that spend so much effort, going out and spending the effort to do the surveys, but then it's really hard to identify the bees. And I want your effort to be as highly valuable as it possibly can be. And that means, really practicing those photographs. So if you, go back and look in Bumblebee Watch and look at the records you submitted, what proportion of them, was I able to identify to species? If you feel like you need feedback and help on this aspect of the project, please reach out to me. I think I can provide some resources and help. We have a section of our website that's dedicated to taking high quality photos, and would really encourage you to use those resources as much as possible. We really need you to be photographers more than bumblebee identifiers. It's really fun to be bumblebee identifiers, and it's a skill set I want to all help you get better at. But taking those good photos is really what we need to do. Finally, you're just basically going to go to Bumblebee Watch, and what you will do is you'll take all the information from your data sheets and you will put those data basically directly into Bumblebee Watch. It should be fairly straightforward. The main thing that you have to think about doing, whoops, sorry. I had a video started here that I am trying to stop. This is hilarious. This is a video that I wanted you to be aware of. Sorry, funny, not funny. For some reason I am having a, there we go. There we go. Okay. What I wanted to let you know is that video is available. If you need help with Bumblebee Watch, you should be able to find that video of submitting your data on our website. So you should be able to go watch that and learn how to submit your data. The real key that I want you all to focus on this year is when you go to submit your data, the first step is choosing a project. If you conducted a full roadside survey or a full point survey, you're going to choose Bumblebee Watch, Bumblebee Atlas, or Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas in that project. And that will open up all of the fields that you submitted. If you did not conduct an official survey and you're just submitting a Bumblebee observation and incidental sighting, that's great. We want you to do that too. But when you do that, please don't choose Bumblebee Atlas. Please choose either Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Incidental or choose Bumblebee Watch. Either one of those will close those other fields, and you'll be able to submit your data without answering all those questions that you really won't have the answer to if you didn't conduct a full survey. Again, our website is a treasure trove of resources. We're on social media. We have a private Facebook group where folks interact with each other. So please join us there if you would like to and are interested. There are also a whole host of identification resources that are available. The two that I would recommend most would be the Bumblebees of North America guidebook and the Bumblebees of the Western United States that you see here on the screen. There's also Bumblebee Watch and iNaturalist and Bug Guide, which are also resources that are available out there for you to use for identification. With that, I will say thank you very much. And if there is time to answer a couple questions, it looks like we're right up against 7:30 here. I've got a couple minutes. I can stick around if folks want me to answer any questions. But just before you go, just wanted to say, again, we couldn't do this without all of you. And thank you so much for being here and spending your time with us. And I hope we've created some meaningful experiences for you in the summer as well to go out and really contribute to a real conservation project and help further pollinator conservation in the Pacific Northwest. You've made an enormous difference and will continue to make an enormous difference towards these efforts in the years ahead. So thank you so much. And I'll take a couple questions if there are any.
Rich, there's two questions in the chat that we marked for live answers for you about defining habitat types and surrounding areas.
Okay. Do you want to read them or should I pull them up?
Probably pull them up, I would guess.
Okay.
They're in the questions, not the chat.
Okay. So the question about does surrounding area include the same habitat type as the survey location? So what we want you to do is if you're standing in a 1 hectare plot of a large meadow complex, what we want you to do is choose as many as the 3 sort of topmost habitat types that surround you. If the number 1 surrounding habitat is the same as the area that you were surveying, yes, you would do that. So if you're surveying a grassland and you're surrounded by grasslands, you would choose the number 1, or if it's the second most common of the surrounding habitats, if you're in kind of a small meadow complex that just has a little bit of meadow around it, you would choose forest as your number 1. and then grassland as your number 2. So yes, your survey area and surrounding survey area can be the same. I think that's the answer to that question. The second question, would a forest clear cut dominated by grasses forbs with only a small replanted trees count as grassland meadow? This is going to depend somewhat on the habitat, I think. I think I would probably lean more towards shrub scrub for the type of habitat that you are describing. But it really depends on what it looks like in the interim. If it is truly a clear cut, I think with only grasses and forbs, like the year after a clear cut or something like that, I think you potentially could choose grassland. But to me, those habitats are more of they tend to be shrubby fairly quickly. So, I think you just need to use your best possible judgment that you can, and you're really looking for the dominant vegetation type that's in that survey area. If it is grasses and forbs, then grassland is probably the best checked in that area, but keep an eye out for those shrubs and scrubs as well.
Rich, we had a couple of questions in the chat earlier, and I'll just read them to you real quick.
Okay, thanks.
If there's data from previous years that wasn't reported, is there any value or way to still report it?
Yes, absolutely. Please submit any outstanding data. We sort of every year we send out deadlines for data entry, and that's really just to get included in that year's summary. But at the end of all of this, we will be doing a 6-year summary of all of the data that's been collected. So any data that you've collected throughout the course of the project that's still out there, please submit it. If it's more than a year old, sending me a notification, an email will help me find it in Bumblebee Watch. Otherwise, it just won't pop up. I often use a year filter there, and I may not see something from 2019, but it's still important, and we still want it, especially if you have the data. So yes, any old data that's still lingering out there, we would really appreciate it if you would submit.
And then one more that you touched on briefly, but I didn't hear this specific piece. Is there going to be an organized Franklin bee search in 2023? A Franklin bee weekend.
Yeah, that event has been put on by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service every year. We're not directly involved. We're sort of indirectly involved. I am not coordinating it. I do not know the dates off of the top of my head, but I do know that it's happening. It is usually, I believe, the second weekend or the few days before the second weekend in July, I believe, is the time frame that they do that every year. If you are interested and want to know more about the dates and location to meet up, Jeff Everett is your appropriate contact. He's at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If you need his email address, you can email me, and I will serve as an intermediary to get you that information. Sorry, my tongue is tied after 2 hours. But yeah, I can get you that contact information if you need it. But yes, it is happening. I just don't know the specific details.
I think that's it.
Fantastic. Well, on behalf of all my team that's here tonight, I just want to say thanks again, and we look forward to all the data you'll be sending us our way. In case you're curious, we are recording this presentation, and we will be posting it to the website. In case you have friends that didn't get a chance to attend tonight, or you want to rewatch it at some point, we'll be posting it to YouTube hopefully within the next week or so, and we'll also make sure it gets to the PNW Atlas website. And then we'll also share it on social media and stuff like that to make sure that everybody gets to see the 2023 priorities. And we'll try to divide it up into chapters as well. We can do that in YouTube now, where we can sort of highlight areas so you can really just get to those key areas that you want to watch. So again, I'm going to sign us off and kick everybody out. Have a great night, and thanks so much for all that you've done and continue to do. Really, really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.